that the Lord would deliver Judah. So at that point, Hezekiah's faith was still strong. He still relied solely on the Lord to deliver him. And then in 2 Kings 19, Isaiah offers reassurance to Hezekiah that the Lord would deliver the remnant of Judah, and he fulfilled that, and he struck 185,000 Assyrians in one night. If you remember, they were camped outside of Judah. Because Hezekiah was still distraught. He still, when Assyria tried to subvert his people, he was still very distraught about that, but he still relied on the Lord. And Isaiah was there to offer reassurance. So then in 682 BC, Hezekiah becomes deathly ill, and Isaiah instructs him to get his house in order. So then as we discussed, Hezekiah called on the Lord to remember how he had walked in truth and wholeheartedly, and that he did not want to die. So the Lord answered his prayer.
I have a question. I know this is a what-if situation, but was that, yes, God answered his prayer about extending his life, but was that a good thing? Because later we know the end of the story, where some people came, was checking out the land, he was like showing it off and kind of like prideful.
Yep.
And then it's like, how much did you show? And it's like,
Hey, quit in that.
and so, that part was
Well,
not.
yeah, let's talk about that. So Hezekiah was Berodach, who was the leader of Babylon at the time, who were fairly insignificant in comparison to Assyria at this time. He came over during Hezekiah's illness and offered him gifts and letters. So he was kind of being, he was trying to influence the king to win favor, because I think they understood the significance of Judah. So he sways Hezekiah. So then when Babylon visits Judah, Hezekiah, after he's healed, Hezekiah boasts of his wealth, showing them all the treasures in their house in the temple. So like in 2 Kings 20, it says, there was nothing in his house nor in all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. So indicating that his life was extended, and he became boastful of what he had achieved in that extension of his life. So showing Babylon, look at all that I've acquired. Look at my riches. Look at my land.
But they did look at his land.
Yeah, it was a strategic move on Babylon, because they got a internal view of how to infiltrate Judah. So, yeah, as you said, the extended time that Hezekiah got, he did not use properly. He lost his faith in the Lord. He did not rely on the Lord. Because they're still, during that time period, they're still going up against Assyria. Assyria is still a major power.
So it's a lesson, don't ask the Lord to extend your life.
I don't know.
It's only 39 when you got 6.
I think the lesson is just don't lose faith in the Lord, no matter how much time you give him.
There also be, don't take the Lord for granted. Because how his lesson was, he took the Lord for granted because of they extend life. So, and he says he was being boastful. And then also there's a proverb that says, "Pride cometh before the fall."
Mhm.
So, then that is how we see him in his later days.
Yep. So remember, it wasn't too many years ago that Hezekiah basically stripped the temple of all its wealth to give to Assyria because they imposed a heavy tax on them. So again, just showing, not too long ago, the temple was basically laid barren, and now it's built back up. They've acquired wealth, and he attributes it to himself. So then Isaiah visits Hezekiah after he had shown Babylon what he had acquired. So in response, Isaiah tells Hezekiah that his sons and the wealth that was accumulated would be carried off to Babylon. So Hezekiah considered this to be good because then they would be free from Assyria completely and would live peacefully under the great nation of Babylon. So again, he's placed his trust and faith in a nation rather than God. So saying their peace would be acquired through Babylon and rather than God. So this is ultimately what led to Judah's captivity by Babylon. So Babylon is a tool for judgment against Judah. So why is the Lord pronouncing judgment on Babylon? What did they do? They were just fulfilling what the Lord had decreed for Judah.
They were also right after.
Okay. So let's turn to Daniel. I don't think King Nebuchadnezzar is a book. Daniel 4, verse 28 through 30.
I think it was Belshazzar.
Mm-hmm.
4:30.
Yeah, 4:30. Daniel 4, 28 through 30. If someone gets there before I do.
So 20.
Daniel 4,
28 through 30. Yep.
While these words were still on the king's lips, a voice spoke from heaven. It has been decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar, that your kingdom is taken from you. You shall be cast out from among men, and shall dwell with wild beasts. You shall be given grass to eat like an ox. And 7 years shall pass over you, until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. And once this was fulfilled, Nebuchadnezzar was cast out from among men. He ate grass like an ox, and his body was bathed with the dew of heaven, until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle, and his nails like the claws of a bird.
Okay. So that was the result of Nebuchadnezzar's attitude, which is, I'll read Daniel 5, verse 18 through 21. It says, Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave Nebuchadnezzar your father the kingdom, as well as the greatness, glory, and majesty. Because of the greatness he gave him, all the peoples and nations and languages trembled with fear before him. Anyone he wanted to, he put to death. Anyone he wanted to, he kept alive. Anyone he wanted to, he advanced, and anyone he wanted to, he humbled. But when he grew proud and his spirit became hard, he began treating people arrogantly. So he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. He was driven from human society, His heart was made like that of an animal, and he lived with the wild donkeys. He was fed with grass like an ox, and his body was drenched with dew from the sky until he learned that the Most High God rules in the human kingdom and sets up over it whomever he pleases. So Nebuchadnezzar's humbled because of a shared attitude similar to Hezekiah. And you think his son Belshazzar would have had a good example, to live off of, to see his dad in a state like that. But he didn't heed the example. So likewise, Belshazzar was exceedingly proud, and he completely disregarded God. So if we look at Daniel 5, 1-4, it says, Belshazzar the king gave a great banquet for... Let me make sure I'm caught up here. Huh. You want to click forward for me? Keep going. There we go. That's good. All right. Yep. What's that? Yeah. All right, Daniel 5, verse 1-4. It says, Belshazzar the king gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his lords, and in the presence of the 1,000 he was drinking wine. While tasting the wine, Belshazzar ordered that the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had removed from the temple in Jerusalem be brought, so that the king, his lords, his wives, and his concubines could drink from them. So they brought the gold vessels which had been removed from the sanctuary of the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king, his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank their wine and praised their gods, made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And then later, Daniel 5, 22-31, it says, But Belshazzar, you, his son, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. So he knew of his father's condition, that he was humbled by God. Hold on a second. Instead, you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven by having him bring you the vessels from his house, and you and your lords, your wives and your concubines drank wine from them when you offered praise to your gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which can't see, hear, or know anything. Meanwhile, God, who holds your very breath in his hands, and to whom belongs everything you do, you have not glorified. So, if you remember back in Isaiah 14 when we read about the morning star, there's a similar verbiage in I believe as Ezekiel regarding the king of Tyre. So a lot of people like to equate that to the adversary or Satan, but it's really just shows the loftiness, the attitude of the ruler at that time, which in Isaiah 14 was Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar. So Belshazzar takes basically the dedicated utensils from the temple and uses them to dedicate to his gods, showing how lofty he's become in his own mind. So that's really the reasoning behind Babylon's fall. So similar to Judah, they become proud and they are brought low by God. Did you have something you want to say, Dave?
think Belshazzar's actually his grand. Because it usually talks about when it's father, it's usually talking about his grandfather, not his actual father.
I think when King Nebuchadnezzar was brought low, that and the kingdom was given over to his Belshazzar in his stead. And it says his in verse 22 that Belshazzar was essentially his son.
Well, my side note says ancestor.
Ancestor. It could be.
They're related.
Yeah. So let's we'll take note of that, because that's gonna come into play when we look at Babylon in a prophetic sense. This attitude that Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar had. All right. So the Lord pronounces basically in chapters 13 and 14 of Isaiah is pronouncing judgment on Babylon. So then he moves over to the surrounding nations, to the Philistines and to Moab, or the Moabites. What is Israel's history with Moab? That's it.
Strained.
Strained? Who is Moab?
The Moabites were from the incestual relationship with Lot and his daughter. So they were inhabitants east of the Dead Sea.
Mm-hmm. So Moab was a nephew of Abraham, right?
Okay.
Son of Lot.
Yes.
Lot was Abraham's.
Nephew.
Huh?
Wasn't he his nephew?
Yeah, he was nephew
Lot
of
was Abraham's
it-
nephew.
Yes.
But Moab
So-
would have been like
nephew,
a grandson.
grandnephew.
Nephew, but also son. It's weird.
Sorry, Justin, where were you at?
Oh, sorry, I didn't put this on the PowerPoint.
Okay.
So you can leave it on the Great Gatsby.
I'll find it. There you go.
Cheers.
Was Nebuchadnezzar throwing parties in hopes that his
That's
ex-girlfriend
Belshazzar.
would come back?
That's
Or Belshazzar?
the cup
Yeah.
that Indiana Jones found.
Belshazzar's cup.
Yeah.
Wound up on Wall Street.
All right. So who else are the Moabites? What's their history? So they're related to Israel.
They gave Israel grief when Gideon was alive.
Okay.
But before that,
David first.
Moses was married to a Moabite woman.
No,
Mm.
it was Midian.
Maybe no. Sorry.
Ruth.
Exactly.
Yep. Why is that unique?
Because she was in the line of Jesus.
Okay. Let's look at so the Moabites were notorious for leading Israel astray into paganism, or the worship of foreign gods. Anybody remember what the Moabites' god was? Or Baal? Baal? Remember what Baal means? Baal? My Lord? Lord?
I thought it would start with an M.
Murdoch? Well, that was
Marduk.
Marduk.
That was Moabite.
That was the name they gave him, but that just means, Baal just means my Lord.
No, the one that they offered.
Oh,
babies.
Moloch.
yeah, that's Molech.
Yeah.
That's not the Moabites, though.
Oh, that isn't?
No.
Oh. How did I put that?
Let's look at 1 Kings 11:7. I can just read it. You don't have to turn there.
What?
11, verse 7. It says, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill in front of Jerusalem, and another for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. So Moab, or the Moabites, were an influence to Solomon with their god Chemosh. If we look at Numbers 25, 1 through 3, Kinnish, is that how you say it? Kinnish. Okay. Numbers 25, verse 1 through 3. Says, Israel stayed at Shittim, and there the peoples began whoring with the women of Moab. These women invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, where the people ate and bowed down to their gods. With Israel thus joined to Baal Por, the anger of Adonai blazed up against Israel. So again, just showing that the Moabites influenced Israel all through their earlier history. Go ahead, Kenny.
Including Balaam, when they hired
Yep.
Balaam to curse when they were coming
Yep.
across.
So the Moabites were an extremely, I guess, sexual. Their paganism was extremely sexual in nature. They were very immoral.
It's kind of like the same military intelligence. Of course,
Yeah.
all of them were.
Yeah. Deuteronomy 23, verse 3 through 7. Yeah, go ahead.
No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of Yahweh, none of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of Yahweh, because they did not meet you with food and water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor from Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you. Nevertheless, Yahweh your Elohim was not willing to listen to Balaam, but Yahweh your Elohim turned the curse into a blessing for you, because Yahweh your Elohim loves you. You shall never seek their peace or their prosperity all your days. You shall not detest an Edomite, if he is your brother. You shall not detest an Egyptian, because you were an alien in his land.
So not only did Moabites influence Israel in paganism, but they also prevented them, or tried to prevent them from entering into the land that was promised to them. So as Ruth brought up about Ruth, so here we have a commandment from the Lord that says even down to the 10th generation that no Moabite should enter into the assembly of the Lord. But obviously Ruth, being a Moabite, was an exception, right? So even though this command was announced by God, Ruth was able to find favor with the Lord, because the majority of Israel had departed from the Lord and were worshiping gods of the surrounding nations. But Ruth forsake her people, Moabites, and their gods, and chose to follow God of Israel. So she was an exception. So showing God's mercy and grace to those who choose Him. So again, the Lord's pronouncing judgment on the Moabites, but the Moabites have already been dealt a heavy hand. If you remember, both Saul and David all but wiped out the Moabites. And those that were left were made to pay tribute to Israel. But when King Ahab died, Mesha, the king of Moab, refused to pay the tribute. If we look at 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 1, it's just a quick verse. It says, after Ahab's death, Moab rebelled against Israel. And in correlation to that, if we go to chapter 3, verse 4 through 5, it says, Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheep breeder, and he used to send the king of Israel the wool of 100,000 lambs and of 100,000 rams as tribute. But after Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel, and Joram left Shamron and mustered all Israel. He also went and sent this word to Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and the king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you join me in attacking Moab? So Moab's still a thorn in Judah and Israel's side. So the judgment on Moab by the Lord is from the accumulation of their influence on Israel and the attitude that they had against Israel. So they were influential in Israel departing from the Lord, and they were also similar to the Philistines and the Canaanites against Israel from entering into the Promised Land. So who did the Lord use to judge Moab? We've been talking about him all this morning.
Babylon.
Babylon, right? So Babylon was an instrument used to judge Moab. So they were utterly destroyed by Babylon. And I'm out of time, so before we get into the prophetic sense of Babylon, we'll look at the other surrounding, I think it go up, so chapters 16, 17, 18, and 19 talk about judgment on some of the other surrounding nations, so we'll go into that as well. Any comments or questions? Okay. Thank you. That's it.